Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it. When I first received the remarkably gracious invitation to speak at this great annual event, I naturally assumed it was some sort of sting operation. One of those entrapment deals to get me to pay the millions my children have run up in overdue books and DVDs. So instead of seeing you and Abigail Courage, I thought I'd be faced with a room full of angry librarians ready to break thumbs. Well, I'm glad there aren't any angry librarians here, at least not yet. Give me a few minutes. Right now, I want to give you the last word on libraries, a foolproof strategy for entering the writing life, and a complete summary of my recent book, all in less than 12 minutes. So tether yourself to your seats with a tie, scarf, or a chain of napkins, and we're off. Libraries. My grateful heart aches with sentiment for the personal associations that come to the fore whenever libraries cross my mind. A boy, a book, and a white noise machine that makes the boy fall asleep before he could ever read the book. It all started back in the little Armonk library in my hometown. White building, very quaint. I was about 8, and with the misplaced swagger of a young boy that would ultimately, with the passage of time and gathering of maturity, give way to the misplaced swagger of a grown man, I told her I could read any book in this library. Why, she smiled kindly, don't you start with the Hardy Boys? I did, and was ultimately taken by an almost imperceptible buzz. It wasn't quite a sound, but it wasn't quite the lack of a sound. I was beguiled, transfixed. Ultimately, I was asleep. The library's white noise machine, a tool of the devil to generations of readers, had lulled me off well before Jeff and Matt had gotten to the bottom of their first Bayport mystery. Fast forward to a college visit to Brandeis. I was there early, so like any earnest, ambitious, prospective student, I hit the library to see what the girls looked like. I picked up a book to camouflage my intentions, but no sooner had laid my eyes on a heaven-set brunette than I was taken down. They apparently had white noise machines in Massachusetts libraries too. My head hit the study desk as the goddess of sweats ambled off into a future without me. I've learned a lot about life at libraries. The fates are cruel, especially when white noise machines are involved. What's worse, though, was this, my Brandeis interview. I had slept through its starting time. Feeling dumb, the sort of shame you commonly feel when you've done something to fritter away your entire future, I then, with my face still creased with sleep, spent the bulk of my interview pontificating about the many evils of those noise machines. Brandeis ambled off into a future without me. I noticed later in life, interestingly enough, that white noise machines were the defining feature of a therapist's waiting office, a prelude to sharing your feelings, and another association that tends to put me flat asleep. Speaking of feelings and the sharing thereof, let's talk about the writing life. There's a connection, though there shouldn't be. I get asked a lot, an awful lot, an awful lot, some essential questions from people who want to become writers, from what type of computer to use, to how their journey of self-discovery through the written word should begin. Self-the-whatery? I was on a panel recently with a writer who spoke about how in writing she cut so close to the psychological bone that she took herself to the edge of mental insanity each and every time she sat down at her dell. I'm not one to judge, so I'm not saying this is aggravating, pretentious dribble. But suffice to say that as she spoke, I sat behind her, I very subtly began to stab out my ears with a pen. Look, I started my career on Wall Street, cold calling people at dinner time to try to get the dupes to buy stocks. You want an endeavor that draws you to the edge of insanity? Try one that interrupts an American while they're eating. But writing and the lip of insanity, as my 12-year-old daughter is fond of saying, please. Besides the white noise machines it's in cahoots with the librarians, I don't have anything against the field of psychology. My wife is a psychologist, and for too many years to count, I've been a patient. But here's a problem as it relates to writing. We live in what can only be described as a therapized society, Conversations center on the tidy exchanges of tediously well-honed narratives about our past. Speaking in the jargon of self-knowledge has become a supreme value in otherwise polite circles. And the self, the evil eye, has invaded and taken over the field of writing. But writing, at least good writing, is rarely about us. I say this with apologies to a generation of unreadable memoirs, but writing is about interesting subjects and rich, complex narratives out there in the world, or alive and kicking in an imagination. Gaze inward too long, and your eyes will cross. I even see this in how my three little kids are taught writing. Where do they tell you to start? I ask them. They tell us to write about what we know, my kids tell me. You're 7, I answered. Just what it is that you know. Never mind, too, that what we tend to know, even as adults, runs into broad categories of interest. Basketball, say, in my case, and generality is the enemy of good writing. We're starting kids out in writing, which requires boundless curiosity about others and their specific storylines, by commanding them to take a mirror and hold it up to their most insufferably broad interests. No wonder my own students, I teach journalism at college journalism, come in with a supernatural ability to gaze at their own feelings, but lagging energy once the subject turns to others. Besides, all this journey of self-discovery, as it relates specifically to the process of writing, always makes too big of a deal of it. There's too much too much at stake. As such, writing becomes too intimidating to attempt, much less complete. You want to write anything, I tell my students and my own kids, find an interesting person with a good story, ask a million questions, try to mix in a well-turned phrase or two, give yourself a deadline, hit the deadline, except in an event of a death in the family, your own, and there you have it. Nothing more, but, and this is essential in an age when too many fail by looking inward for subject matter and motivation, nothing less. Now I'd like to talk to you ever so briefly about my recent book, why I like the idea so much to take a couple years of articles from the Times and do it in a book that I beg you to buy after this, so my 3 kids don't ultimately have to suffer through 4 years of home college school. I was reading a local newspaper. I live over in Hastings. I was reading a local newspaper, the Journal News, which, like many newspapers, is shrinking and devoid of color each and every day. But they had this little Just the Facts Man article about this man from Kansas who had been implicated, this man from Pelham, which is across the county, this very white shoe wealthy area, who had been implicated in an old Kansas murder. I knew the street to be a really well-renowned street, and it was just intriguing. What sort of doubly intrigued me was the name of that old Kansas town. It was named Olathe. Somewhere in the back of my mind, it rang a bell. And I went to my bookshelf, and sure enough, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood is about 2 murderers who start the night in Olathe, kill the Clutter family, then melt back into Olathe. But this murder, I could tell from this little article, was already so different. Because these 2 murderers who had committed this most brutal crime had not been caught for whatever reason. They had not been charged. And in the time since the murder, unlike Dick and Perry, the In Cold Blood killers who were caught and hung soon afterwards in a sort of a play of quick frontier justice, these guys got free. And not only did they get free, they went on to lead incredibly successful and charmed lives. Harvard Business School, COO of major corporations, all the things you could ask for from life in many, many ways. 7 children between them. And so it was a little bit of a whodunit on the one hand, and on the other, I just love the way the story gave you this mirrored perspective on guilt, on redemption, and our abilities to put the worst that we've done behind us. So that's really all I have to say. To all you librarians, I forgive the worst that you've done, putting those white noise machines there to tell so many generations of readers. And I really appreciate you having me here, and thanks again.